Testing. All right, guys. Sorry about that. We are back. So what's up? I'm Jacob Litzo, your Elixir Mentor, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Elixir Mentor Podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to Elixir, from interviews with enthusiasts, pioneers in the community, to innovative projects and libraries shaping Elixir's future. So let's get started. Today, I'm thrilled to have Andrés Alejos, an expert in LiveBook and machine learning within the Elixir ecosystem. Andrés brings a wealth of knowledge about leveraging these powerful tools to enhance Elixir projects and push the boundaries of what's possible in our community. So Andrés, welcome to the show and thank you so much for being here. Do you want to start with just a really brief introduction of who you are?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity. Hi, everyone. My name's Andrés. I kind of got started in Elixir at this point a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. Kind of mainly dove deep headfirst into the machine learning stuff at first. I hardly even dealt with OTP, for the first 6 months to 8 months, something like that. Didn't even know what it was. Somebody recommended me a book that said like designing OTP applications, and got through like the first 10 pages. It was like, okay, can they define OTP? Because I don't even know what this is. And that was like 6 months into me working on it. But I mainly do kind of machine learning. LiveBook right now has been my focus, and that kind of started as a tool that I was using for doing some of the machine learning stuff. I gave this talk at ElixirConf 2023, where I did my whole talk, well, like half of it, all the coding portion out of LiveBook. And ever since then, I really got into LiveBook and just saw the potential it had for all the different, aspects of being an educational tool, being a development tool, being internal, like developer tooling, or, for an internal application that you have for your own company, stuff like that. So I've just kind of the past probably 6 months been really diving deep with LiveBook and kind of mainly doing developer style tools. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you guys don't follow Andrés on Twitter, I highly suggest it. He's always posting cool little video snippets of his implementations and projects. Like the most recent one you've been working on is your little Ecto schema tool. Mm-hmm. And then I really liked your like vulgar filter.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
That one there's a couple of projects that I did back to back. It was TJ DeVries, he's a Twitch streamer. He was streaming something and he was doing an application in Elixir. And the whole point of it, the project he was working on was he does all of his like Twitch chat support. He uses Elixir for that. He uses Elixir to run like his chat rewards website. And so he was trying to link in this ability to where somebody on their first like chat message of the day, if they were like a premium subscriber, it would play an audio message that they chose. So they would basically do a chat command that says, take this YouTube video at this time marker, and it would take the first 5 seconds of it and make it like their intro music for the day type thing. And so at the time of the stream I was watching, he was like manually filtering it for anything that was vulgar or bad or anything like that, because he didn't want that on the stream, obviously. So he was like manually, when somebody would submit it, he would look at it. And I chimed in chat. I was like, hey, you could do this in Elixir. Like, you're already in Elixir. You can do this in Elixir in like 10 minutes. And he kind of said like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do that at some point. And so then I went on and I just did it. And like, I think it ended up taking like 3 or 4 minutes, and I tweeted the whole process, and it's in LiveBook, because LiveBook, you have smart cells, and you can, the smart cells can generate code for you, and they give you a place to start. So I went in and used smart cells to make this whole process and showed it off. And then, that was a fun project to do. It didn't take that long. And it was kind of interesting sometimes seeing the things that people really catch on to, and the things that really interest people sometimes are the things that like I don't plan out as much and definitely don't take as much time to do, but they're for an application that people can relate to a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Can you start with explaining to everyone what LiveBook is and like what makes it so amazing?
Yeah. So if anybody's come from Python, or really even Julia is a part of this, and then R, Jupyter Notebook was really made for those 3 kind of program languages. Like Jupyter is like Julia, Python, and R. That's where it came from. But it's they call them like scientific computing kind of interactive notebook environments. Is some of the different, phraseology around it. But it's this idea of having like it's almost like an enhanced REPL or interactive shell for your languages, to where you can share them around. You can supposedly have reproducibility, right? Elixir does that better than some other languages, and it gives you the ability to like export these sessions essentially. And in the machine learning and data science communities, these are one of the predominant ways in which work gets done, because a lot of the people who do that sort of work aren't actually programmers by trade or by education. Like they learn it because they're data scientists or they're researchers. And that's kind of the medium in which research is done. Oftentimes, if you go to a lot of, machine learning repositories that are related to papers, they'll oftentimes either have like Python projects, or they'll have Jupyter notebooks where this sort of thing is done. So LiveBook is kind of Elixir's answer to Jupyter, but it's not a simple clone, right? Like I think they've done a great job in taking inspiration from it, but taking all of the really good things and then peppering in the good things about Elixir. Like some of my favorite things are the fact that they, like some of the decisions they made, such as making it exportable as just Markdown. So I think they did a good job at recognizing that when you're starting from behind another ecosystem, you kind of have to not rely on other people adopting your thing. Like if you, like for example, GitLab, GitHub, all those places support rendering Jupyter as like their notebook format. But Jupyter, the way it exports is actually just a JSON, and it's not especially human readable in the way it exports. But because the places that are major, like hosting websites, render it and support rendering for it, you can kind of safely put that out there and assume that when people come and look at your thing, they'll be able to just kind of scan it and read it. And I think part of the decision, I don't know this for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if part of the decision to make it exportable as Markdown for LiveBook is knowing that I don't want to make the LiveBook team doesn't want to make a format where when exported isn't human readable and doesn't get rendered anywhere that you might want to host this, right? So that's one decision, is they made it all like serialized right to Markdown. Another really cool thing it does is it's explicitly like in order from top to bottom reproducible, right? Because it's leveraging kind of state transitions between cells from Elixir being a functional language, where you can fork sections. So you can fork like each H2 header. You can decide if it's like a continuous section that basically essentially forks from the previous one, or if it forks from another section to where like the state doesn't follow it, right? But because of that, because the mix install is at the very top, the setup is at the very top, as opposed to Jupyter, where it's dependent on what kernel you're using, which is like the kernel being basically the target environment, like Python 3.11, Python 3.12, right? But you basically tell Jupyter to look at this path to do it, rather than, whereas in Elixir, it's based on the Elixir version, but all of the setup code is done at the top for LiveBook. So it's extremely reproducible, because there's always going to be a setup block up there that sets up the project in the way you've defined, pinned at the versions you wanted, and then it's going to execute in the order you wanted. But I know that was a lot, but that's just some of the kind of differences.
No, I think that's good. So like when it's obviously an awesome like prototyping proof of concept tool for developers. You don't have to create a whole project. You can write a simple script. You have UI. You can evaluate things relatively quickly. And like from the data scientist point of view, they don't really need anything else if they're just processing through data and need to write short, simple scripts to evaluate, or in like the way you integrate like Bumblebee and machine learning things. You're always doing things in like 5 minutes or less, I feel like, which is pretty cool. So I feel like is there a little bit of a learning curve? How long where did you come from? Did you come from using Jupyter notebooks and then you found LiveBook? How did that kind of work?
So I've like worked a ton in Python, but really I was working mainly in Elixir on the machine learning stuff when I came to LiveBook. And the reason I came to LiveBook is because I was trying to use it for my talk, and I had seen a lot about it, and I decided that it'd probably be a really good way to demonstrate my talk because of some of those points I talked about, the reproducibility. Like the worst thing is to start your demo and then have something come up where it doesn't match the development environment, or something updated under the hood and it doesn't work. So I was really coming from like an Elixir background, but I've definitely used Jupyter a ton. And so I know Jupyter, but I would say like Jupyter probably has less of a learning curve with relation to the language, right? Like if you work in Python, Jupyter isn't that far away from Python. But LiveBook kind of has a lot of things in it that aren't necessarily inherited like directly from Elixir, in the sense of like if you know Elixir, you might jump into LiveBook and still miss out on like 80% of the features without really knowing it. That's largely because Kino is the interactive library in LiveBook, right, in Elixir, that basically gives you the ability to create like UI and widgets and interactive kind of elements on LiveBook. And Kino, like I never used anything like that for Jupyter. And Jupyter, there are like third-party packages that interact with the Jupyter environment, but Kino being something like supported by the LiveBook team slash like kind of in Elixir, it's a little bit, there's a bit of a learning curve if you're trying to use Kino. Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I always think about trying to learn it and then I run out of time or forget, because I think it'd be really good to integrate like LiveBook with my Elixir course. I think it would be a lot better to represent like the simple, like basic data types and things like that instead of in an IEX shell, which I do a lot of shell work, but I feel like it's hard to read and follow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest pros of LiveBook is the educational slash documentation possibilities with it. Dockyard Academy, Brooklyn Myers is the one running that, works for Dockyard, and they do these like cohorts where people come in and they teach them Elixir. And as far as I know, they're still using LiveBook to teach that course, and they've contributed back to the LiveBook ecosystem with some like smart cells. I know that at least one they did, which is like a hidden answer smart cell that lets you kind of hide content, which helps if you're doing like an interactive kind of question and answer type cells, because it'll basically let you do hints and stuff like that, and it'll show you the hints as you go. And then just documentation, right? For the first library I wrote in Elixir, which is really how I kind of dove in headfirst when it came to Elixir, and I started writing like an XGBoost port. For those who don't know, XGBoost is just one of the biggest like neural network based machine learning libraries, and they have Python. They have like bindings for Python, for R, for Scala, and I wrote some for Elixir. And I was trying to do the plotting. I was trying to add support for plotting, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to do it because I'm not very good in terms of at doing visualizations and stuff like that with Elixir. I'd never done it before. And Jose actually, somebody asked me about this at the ElixirConf talk I gave. And he asked like, hey, if I don't want to use this to actually make predictions, but if I want to use this to like draw out a diagram and inform decisions, like if I want to be able to give that to a human, how would I do that? And at the time I didn't really have a good answer within Elixir. And I kind of just said, hey, we don't really support that right now. But in Python, if you go to sklearn, if you use their decision tree classifier, it can print out for you like a nice decision tree, on paper type thing. And after that talk, Jose came up to me. He's like, hey, you should use Kino to do that. Like, there's no reason we couldn't do this in Elixir. You should do that with Kino. So then that's when I kind of started working with Kino and went and made that. But for that, the whole documentation I show for that is in LiveBook as well. And yeah, documentation, courses, all that stuff, I think LiveBook is the perfect medium for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I need to spend more time. I got to start diving in.
It is a bit of a time sink.
When are we going to see a live view or a LiveBook course from you?
I've actually thought about it. Originally, so I've thought about making a live view course, but LiveBook course. But one, I feel like I did it
first. Sorry, I started it.
Yeah. But there's a few things. One, I had a son born in March, and it's my first child. So that kind of has obviously taken some time. Thank you. And that's actually one of the reasons that LiveBook has been kind of the center of my attention, because I can do small projects that don't take a ton of time. And like when I have to context switch a lot between taking care of the baby and, doing work, because Elixir isn't my full-time job. I just do it in my free time and like do that and whatever else I do, right? When I'm context switching, LiveBook is really a fun medium to kind of work on because one, I feel like there's a lot to be discovered with it. Like I feel like there's like, in a sense, a lot of low hanging fruit of like stuff you can do with LiveBook in that ecosystem that's not that hard, that has a large impact just because it's such a new thing. And two, like it just gives you the ability to prototype, like you said, like make kind of fun projects. I kind of think about it as like that idea of like creative coding, where it's like you find tasks to do and try to find fun, cool, new ways to do it. And then if you find a way to do it that's cool, and especially when it doesn't take a long time to do, like people find a lot of interest in like really low barriers to entry on things, right? They're like, the lower the barrier to entry is on machine learning stuff, people are really interested. But 5 years ago, when you could do a lot of these same things, but not using, a GPT, it's like a lot of the stuff people use GPTs for, there's been models that support doing those things for a long time, but you couldn't just hit an API point and ask it in plain English to do it. So I think LiveBook is very good at lowering the barrier to entry on things, especially with like their smart cells.
Yeah. Well, and like the simplicity that like when you were recording, audio and things like that, if you were just to spin up your own project, just getting the UI off the ground would be a huge time suck, and you don't really have that anymore.
Yeah, that's actually a huge reason I like LiveBook, is because there's a lot of things that really benefit from having a UI to showcase, where otherwise without something like LiveBook, I completely hate doing UI development and all that stuff. Like I'm not a web dev. I've dabbled in it before, and I'm like capable of putting up mediocre stuff with it, especially like LiveView gives you that kind of ability where like non-web devs can kind of tap into that stuff, but I wouldn't consider it good by any means. But I still like being able to express certain ideas and get certain points across that kind of really benefit from having those UI elements. And so Keynote does a really good job at that, because it takes care of it's kind of opinionated in certain ways, and it's extensible if you want to, but it means like I could show off some of my demos where I just wrap it into like a little Keynote form, and I don't have to worry about how that looks or how it performs. Like I know it's going to do what it needs to do, and it gets the point across, like I had a project I did, the Synex one, the one that's like an FFmpeg wrapper. Have you seen that one?
I'm not sure. Well, what is it, a recent one?
It's on GitHub. I released it maybe like a month ago, something like that, and it got decent traction. But it basically it's entirely in a single LiveBook, and it's a way to do like FFmpeg natural language commands and have it actually try out the commands. Like as long as you have the FFmpeg binary, right? It'll actually try the commands, and it'll use the standard error and standard out error codes, and it'll feed that back into the LM and kind of do that whole process for you. But that whole thing is based off of LiveBook, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. And it's something that if I tried to do that outside of LiveBook, it would have, one, taken a whole lot more time, and two, I might have just not have done it because I wouldn't have wanted to do all of that kind of annoying UI stuff.
Yeah. See, I should probably just love LiveBook, because I hate doing front end dev. It's definitely not my expertise. And like I rarely will do front end, and Elixir Mentor is kind of the first time where I forced myself to dive in and learn like LiveView and all of that stuff. And like I struggle. Like if you watch my videos, I always will, preface that I'm not good with Tailwind and I'm hacking my way through the front end, but we'll get everything working.
Tailwind UI is your friend, except they don't have like Elixir out of the box. Like I really wish, because Elixir has embraced Tailwind so much, it'd be really cool if Tailwind UI supported like hex templates out of the box, because if you go to Tailwind UI, I think it's like, one-time fee or like it's paid, but you go there and you can go to their components, and they offer them in like raw HTML, or they have like React, or they have Vue. It'd be really awesome if they had hex, or Heeks, but I get why they don't, because it's not probably a big enough market to warrant them doing that for all their components. But
it would be really
UI
cool
is very good
if you could get Heeks templates for sure. Yeah, no, components are your friend, especially when you're me. Like honestly, like the most I'll ever use front end dev for is usually like admin dashboards and things like that, where they don't have to necessarily be the prettiest thing. And like I feel like even LiveBook would be a great use for like an in-house admin tool.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of people using it for that exact purpose, because in LiveBook, I haven't mentioned yet, but there's actually 3 different runtimes for LiveBook. One is standalone, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just you open LiveBook, and starts its own LiveBook instance. And LiveBook in reality is like a client server application. It's a LiveView client server application. And then the attached is essentially, there's the attached runtime, which is where you start LiveBook, but the server, the backend that you reference is essentially it's able to attach to an existing node you have. So you can test out live APIs and live like stuff on production by just attaching your LiveBook and you essentially get like a nice interactive LiveBook session. Yeah. And then they also have their embedded runtime, which is essentially an offline runtime. The main differences I've seen, I haven't actually tried it out myself. I'm pretty sure there's a Nerves LiveView image basically that is not like LiveBook. There's basically a Nerves LiveBook image that has that embedded runtime on it. The main difference I see is obviously it's offline and you basically can preload it with hex packages or any packages you want to be able to add. So you just preload it with which ones are available, and then it doesn't like by default put that on every session.
So you can embed,
to add it.
You can write code in LiveBook and embed it in the hardware for Nerves, or no?
So I'm not exactly sure the way it's implemented. My understanding is essentially it just allows it to be run on embedded architecture.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but that means you can like put it on a Nerves image and run the LiveBook.
That's really cool. That's
which would be great for stuff like when you think of like learning and like sending out, like Raspberry Pis are used a lot for learning and for teaching and educational stuff like that. I see a lot of potential with LiveBook, especially with the smart cells and the code generation from that to be educational.
Yeah, that would be really cool because I used to be really into like IoT stuff, and I feel like it's a good way to get like children interested in programming. And yeah, having a good interface with LiveBook, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, IoT is really interesting. I do a lot with Home Assistant. I don't know if you've dabbled with it before, but it's like one of the really, really big open source project in Python that essentially is just like it aggregates a bunch of different home automation stuff and makes it extensible so that people can write their own plugins. And I forget how the phrases and the terminology they use. It's like you have entities and you have devices and you can run it in so many different ways. Like you can run it as a standalone Docker container. You can run it under what they call a supervised environment, which is essentially like a daemon that supervises their core Docker container, but then lets you like load other Docker containers that then are automatically networked with the Home Assistant instance. But there's a lot of stuff, but like the way a lot of those things work is through MQTT, right? A lot of IoT works through MQTT or like RabbitMQ, which is based on Erlang. And just makes me, I wonder what the Elixir/Erlang potential is with something like residential home automation. Because I know that some companies, especially with like the embedded side, I've heard of them using it on the commercial side for like IoT-ish, but like deploying kind of fleets of these little embedded things. I wonder how it would look on the residential side. That's just kind of a tangent, but that's been something.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting. I had Roman on one of my earlier episodes, and he has like a really small like Phoenix project where he was developing home automation stuff and like closed network surveillance and cameras, and all that was integrating in. I know it's kind of like a pet project, but it goes along that same concept where you can connect all these different IoT devices into like a main hub that can communicate with them all.
Yeah, there's pretty big ecosystems for that. Like Home Assistant's probably the biggest one right now. The other one I haven't used, but it's also decently big is called Habitat. And then you obviously have like Apple HomeKit and you have like Google Home and stuff like that. And like upcoming, I think it's called Thread or Matter, something like that. But it's like an even more universal protocol for IoT that's coming out. So those sorts of things really interest me, and it kind of what Elixir's, what the story could be there with Elixir.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I've kind of fallen out of the IoT world, but it's so much fun when you're playing around. Do you do a lot of like embedded hardware projects or not really?
I wouldn't say embedded projects. I do some stuff with like Raspberry Pi 0W, stuff like that. But you can write that using like like x86 64. So it's not a huge deviation from like writing generic software, right? I don't have that much practice in writing like embedded or like domain specific kind of stuff like that. But it does interest me. But whenever there's like a hardware barrier to entry, like needing to go out and buy hardware to practice something, I was just kind of like, that always becomes something I'm like, oh, I'll get to that eventually. And then I never do really. And then that's kind of why I like the stuff that I do is you have one computer and you can do all this different stuff with it. And you don't really have to worry about, going out in the sun.
Yeah.
Don't have to get your hands dirty.
I always think about that. Like all you need as a software developer is one decent computer. And the amount of revenue and education you get through that one piece of equipment is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong though. Like I have friends who are like electrical engineers and stuff like that. And they're on like, sometimes they'll be on speed dial, when I'm like, oh, I have this question. Let me go ask my friend who actually has knowledge of these things. And in my experience, like people who are electrical engineers, but who do programming are some of the best programmers I know. Because they do the programming as like a enabler to do the thing that they do, and they enjoy the programming, and they didn't have to do it like if they end up doing it on their free time, they didn't have to do it. It wasn't even part of their main curriculum, and they went out and did it. So this is the sort of thing when it comes to the hardware stuff that like I'm interested in, but I kind of recognize with limited time, it's like I don't have enough interest to warrant taking time away from other things to do it. But it's the type of thing, if somebody were come up and tell me about their project they're working on that's to do with that, I'd be extremely interested.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Back in the day, I was a real engineer, and now I just hack my way through life.
Yeah. There is some of that thought too. That's just like the waterfall method is obviously gets a lot of bad rap compared to like agile methodology. But on the other hand, you're like, yeah, but that means they actually have to be calculated about what they did. They didn't just start slinging stuff and let compute take over. Be like, hey, we have all this compute. We can afford to be wrong, and just recompile the same thing 4 times in a row, with making like 1-letter changes because I kept making a typo.
Yeah, what is waterfall? You keep fixing it until it works, and then you move forward.
So waterfall is like the idea of like you basically set a goal and then you back plan everything like way in advance, as opposed to agile, which is like you kind of reassess. Every 6 weeks or whatever your timing increment is. It's like every 6 weeks you reassess where you're at, and it's called agile because the whole point is to like, you can change directions pretty fast. Whereas waterfall is kind of this idea of like, we have this thing that we have a 2-year project horizon on it, and this is going to be our back planning on it. And I've never actually had to work on a project that's that big using the waterfall method. So it's hard for me to properly assess, but from what I've seen on like agile methodology, it does tend to lend itself to like stepping on brakes over and over and over again, and just being like, well, we're just being agile, we're just being nimble.
I feel like agile's gotten a lot of hate over the last couple of weeks.
It has it. I feel like it's gotten, as long as I've had to. I mean, I learned it like at this point like 6 years ago, and I feel like it's always gotten some of that, mainly because it is people who like wholeheartedly ascribe to one or the other, and they don't allow there to be like any nuance, and then that'll get people upset. And I'm not entirely sure that those people actually exist, but the thought of those people existing tends to upset people. So
yeah, I feel like agile, like I'm kind of on the fence. Like I see the benefits of it, and then I also see like everyone says agile is just for the business managers of the company, so they have something to do and can have meetings. But no matter what, like if you stick to anything, at least you're planning your project, because if you don't have your project planned, it's gonna fail.
Yeah, I mean, agile doesn't throw planning out the window by any means.
Right, exactly.
But I guess I was saying that some people attribute lack of planning to just being agile.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
I feel like it forces it because you're constantly creating tasks and cards and reevaluating things every 2 weeks. I think it's almost it happens too often. And I know it doesn't have to be every 2 weeks, but I feel like that's the number we get used to being in the software development world.
Yeah, and I know other places that do longer stretches, or I think in practice, most reasonable people would apply nuance and discretion on a given situation, and then anytime you have somebody who just by the book, like doesn't deviate at all from like, oh, we do 6 weeks and we take 2 hours to do this, and then this takes, but it's like, oh, but we, this was we had these days off, or we went on a trip, so we didn't get this much done. And they're like, no, we have to do it this way. That would probably get grading over time, but I don't know how often that happens. But to be honest, I'm not, I don't have enough visibility of those sorts of things to be able to say one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what, planning projects and staying on track is hard in software. It's hard with a lot of projects though.
Yeah. It's hard even within one person teams. Like I find myself even just by myself, I guess in one person teams, you can afford to not do it as much, but I definitely see where like I end up changing an API or changing an implementation, or I even had something recently where it was like somebody suggested a way to do it. And I was like, I don't think that's the right way. And then I started doing another way and then realized, no, that person was right. And I went back. I was like, I had a single person offer me advice and I somehow dismissed it and then ended up going back and having to rewrite and do it. So
my biggest problem when I notice, like when I'm working on projects alone, ADHD and like the shiny object, you got to be careful because you'll I always will shift and pivot and change directions and like chase whatever's the most exciting at the moment instead of like getting the core features built. But then when you're on a team, I feel like you're laying things out. You have a roadmap and you can't pivot because there's other people on the team building out features and you have to get your features done because they're waiting on you and all of that stuff. So I feel like if you're working on solo projects, treat it like you're on a team. Otherwise, the shiny object will get you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely fall subject to that a lot, but I also have the luxury of like everything I do within Elixir is kind of just for myself, and I end up just sharing it in general. And so LiveBook I like because I can kind of let myself fall into the shiny object thing, but it's not really even a detriment at that point because I can actually finish the project quick enough or get to a point where I can then like share it and be done with it. And then I can kind of just move on. But yeah, if I was like having to see a project to completion, I would probably take a different approach to it.
See, I think LiveBook will be a good avenue for me because I've been procrastinating the machine learning stuff and I do want to give it time. I think it's an important tech to be following and understand a little bit. And I think it would allow me to pick it up, mess around with something in like 30 minutes or less and actually get somewhere and understand what I'm doing. And I feel like that's what I need to do. Just spend my time, cut out 30 minutes a day for my machine learning education.
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of different ways you can try to learn it. I mean, I learned it originally in like an academic setting, where like the very first class I took on it was no computers in there. And it was just like the mathematical derivations of all these things. But for most people, I think that the best way to do it is to like work on a project. And then if something comes up on it that makes you think, oh, this could benefit from this. Like, I think machine learning can often be, people often like have a solution in search of a problem. And then they apply their machine learning to that. And it kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth because it feels like it didn't amount to much. But if you have a problem you're trying to solve and then you realize, oh, I want to do this. Let me see if this like machine learning thing can offer a good solution for it. And then the machine learning thing, because it's, 2024 and it's very plug and play in like the Elixir ecosystem, you realize that actually did work out pretty well for it. That made me like it. And that felt like a good use of my time and a good way to learn it. Like that's the way I think is kind of best to learn things, is seek out to solve a problem and then figure out the things that you need to know to solve that problem, rather than being like, I want to try out this thing. Now let me go find something for it to solve.
Oh,
and that
for
even
sure.
happened. Yeah. That happened to me with like, after I read Chris McCord's Meta Programming and Elixir book. I recommend it to everybody who hasn't read it, because meta programming to me is one of the things that kind of drew me into Elixir the most. The ability to like extend the language. And Jose has talked about this a lot, about how they haven't felt the need to make the core language extremely bloated because the meta programming and extensibility features of it are so good that people can go out and write extensions to the language as they please. So they're very selective about things that they actually put into the language itself. But that drew me into it. And after I read Chris McCord's Meta Programming Elixir, I just wanted to go out and like write a DSL, like I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Let me go write a DSL, even though the book makes it very clear, like this should, only
don't
use
do
this
it
when
for no reason.
Yeah. The book's like very clear about like, don't foot gun yourself. And lo and behold, I went out there, like searching for a problem. And I think there was like 2 or 3 things where I went out and tried to like shoehorn metaprogramming into, only to realize like in some cases either they just didn't work, or, and actually just a function works right here, or, I don't actually need macros for this or something like that.
It's actually really hard to think of a use case to write. Like I think to like, why do I need a DSL? Until like you run into the roadblock, right? Yeah. And then you have a reason, which like whenever people tell me they're learning something, it's always best to learn with a project or a problem you already want to solve. And you're going to learn 10x more than you ever thought you would, and way faster. Like when I learned Elixir, I was building a online fitness marketplace, and I, had a reason to learn it. And I could instantly implement things I was learning as I was building a real product. And I think it's the best way to go.
I think that's absolutely true. And that kind of actually harkens back to when you asked about if I was thinking about releasing a course. Like I've thought about it, but it also requires I have something I want to teach, because I'm not good at being able to just like conjure up things to show people that gets the point across. The best thing I could do is to like take projects I've done, because they were all kind of answers to problems, and to showcase how I did it. But if it came to something where I'm asking people to pay for a course and all of the material is out there, I'm still trying to decide how I feel on that. Because, and I even asked this on Twitter once, I was like, how do people feel about paying for a course where like all of the material to the course is free and open source? And some people were like, oh, I don't mind. The point of the course is to have somebody lead you through it, not that the material's out there. So that's something I've kind of thought about, but that's one of the reasons I haven't done a course, is because I haven't thought of a good thing. Like when you're like, oh, a project that I want to like do through and through, I just haven't thought of one that I would be comfortable producing, getting through, and then asking people to pay money for. But you need to have kind of a problem you're already working on.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I always like, I have a course right now that I'm currently building, but I'm always on the fence. I was like, I actually enjoy having no pressure with my YouTube content versus the pressure of the paid content. And it's tough. Like, and Elixir ecosystem is so niche and small. You're not making a lot of money with all the effort you're putting into anything anyways. But I think like what you do now, just walking through things that you're solving with LiveBook, and when you record it and show your steps, like that's just as valuable as creating like a course just to build a course, Yeah. But like what would be really cool is like a LiveBook fundamentals or basics, where like you can break down what everything is, how it works, how you like even get started. Like I would be interested in that. I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, I've still thought about it, and I know the people on the LiveBook team, like Jonathan, have been really good, and Hugo, I don't know how much he's involved with actually writing LiveBook, but he's a big ambassador of it. Obviously, he's really big into promoting it, and they've been very gracious in terms of what if I have questions on something, which might be hard to get in other projects and other ecosystems. If you have a question just on and oftentimes it's not even on like a public facing API. It's like I went into the source code, found this private API that I somewhat want to abuse and I have questions about. And so then I like reach out and ask them about it. And then they answer, pretty promptly. And it's been great. So I still have instances like that. One of them I learned from something Thomas Millar did, and he does a decent amount of stuff with LiveBook as well. But he did this one that was like Kino Live Reload. That was basically, it would do you'd say like use Kino Live Reload, watch, and then you'd say like the module, the file name you wanted to watch. And within your Kino, like your LiveBook instance, it would watch for those changes and automatically recompile the LiveBook up to that cell, right? So like if you have a cell that's like the 5th cell, it needs to recompile and reevaluate all the cells above it before this cell can reevaluate to a value and not be like considered stale. And so he like found this, he like used the fact that LiveBook is just a server, like a gen server under the hood. He found the info calls that it was listening for, and he was able to like send these, send the actual messages to it, even though it wasn't a public facing API, because all the code is open source and you're able to go, and it worked like a charm, right? And so I started kind of looking into that. And I was kind of looking at what other things you could do to control it. And then I ended up like asking some of the LiveBook team a question about it, and they're able to answer it for me. So they've been really supportive of some of that work that I've been doing, even though none of it is like, well, I guess the smart cell, the Mercury smart cell is like somewhat a part of the ecosystem at this point, because now Hugo's using it for his like ElixirConf talk. But most of the stuff I've been doing has just been kind of these little toy projects and
what
stuff
is
like that, so.
You want to talk about the Mercury smart cell?
Yeah, I could talk about that. That was my first kind of, well, it started out as just me trying to dip my toe into smart cells. And for those who don't know, an Elixir smart cell, I think, is one of the big differentiators with something like Jupyter, where Jupyter, I think you can write extensions for, right? But smart cells offers a behavior. I think that's how they do it. It's like essentially a behavior that you can implement that lets your cell, like lets you define an interactive like UI element that then converts into Elixir code. And so that's where it gets smart cell. And essentially the way it works is, and I'm, maybe if I did a course, I already wanted to do a blog post about like the different Kino levels, because you have like Kino.js. And then if you need more functionality, you have like Kino.js.live. And then if you want extra functionality plus persisting the data in the LiveBook, you can use a smart cell, right? But smart cell offers a way for you to pass like a state into a UI and then have it convert into the code that actually works, that performs that action, right? And it'll keep all of the adders, which their reference, that's their terminology for the state, essentially, like the save state. And it just saves those as like a base 64 JSON encoded inside a comment above. So if you look at your markdown file and you use a smart cell, right above the cell, it'll have a markdown comment, and you'll see where it literally says adders, ATTR, ATTRS, and it'll be like a base 64 JSON encoded thing. And so it actually is able to save that save state. So I was interested in kind of playing around with this. And at the same time, I like saw a tweet that was about like Postman Conf or something like that. And I was just a little bit blown away that Postman had a conference, because I was like, wait, isn't this just like a UI over curl? Like I hadn't really used it that much.
It's just an API app, isn't it? Like
and so I made a little demo that was like very, very basic. It wasn't even working yet. It was just the UI elements, right? And it was something like, would anybody want to see Postman in LiveBook? And it got a ton of good reception. And a lot of people had I had not understood for Postman, because apparently, I don't know this from firsthand experience, but apparently Postman is like changed their pricing models, and I was surprised that it even was paid. And then it even they now require like you to log into the cloud to get certain saves, stuff like that. Like there's just apparently a prioritization on Postman for like kind of like enterprise type clients is my reading of it. I don't know firsthand, like I said, but basically a lot of people seem to be very upset with it and were unhappy with it. And so there's a couple other things that come out. I think there's one called Insomnia. And then there was one that after I started working on Mercury kind of got on Hacker News and became really big, and it was called Bruno. And that started telling me like, oh, there's a really deep interest in this sort of thing. But as I kind of mentioned to you at first, like I'm not a web dev. I actually don't use these sorts of tools all that often, even in the stuff I do. So for me, it was like, I wouldn't say it was a blind spot, but it just caught me off guard how many people thought this was interesting and or are very supportive of it. So I just kind of kept on working on it. And at this point, it's now kind of like Postman, but catered towards Elixir. Cool. And it's a LiveBook smart cell, and it lets you do most of the kind of, I downloaded the Postman Lite client, so whatever their Lite version is, and I kind of like was trying to get somewhat feature parity with that, or at least use that to kind of inform what sort of basic features something like this would use. And so it does a lot of the same things that like their Lite client does, but it integrates with the LiveBook ecosystem. So LiveBook allows you to store secrets like as environment variables in their secret storage hub. And then you can use them anywhere in the code. So it integrates with those for like environment variables. It integrates with the Hex package manager in terms of like letting you add new plugins. So it's based off of Rec, which is HTTP client made by I think his name is pronounced Wojtek. I don't want to mispronounce it, but he's the creator of Hex, and he's also on the Elixir core team. And it's a great library. Rec is the name of the HTTP client, and Mercury
I
is
never
largely
checked
based
it
on that.
out. I'm trying to think who I just had on, and I think Sasha. I had Sasha on, and he brought up Rec, and
Yeah.
he it was one of his major frameworks or tools that he always wants to work with.
Yeah, Rec is great. It's like a batteries included HTTP client that really just has very good defaults and also lets you alter it. One of the things, my favorite parts about it is the way that their plugins work. Essentially, all you have to do to define a rec plugin is define a function that takes in a rec request, and it's either takes in a rec request and a rec response and outputs that, but basically just passes through the struct that's used to hold all of the kind of request information, and it alters it. And as long as you output the struct again, it'll work, and you can just attach it. So the way Mercury leverages this is you can use plugins, and you can essentially just toggle the plugins. Like I made one for GitHub API for their parsing the headers, the headers and the what's it called, the link information, right? When you're doing pagination, it'll give you it'll encode all of the link information. The way GitHub returns it is in a header as just a long string, and you have to parse it. So I just made a rec plugin that'll parse that, and it'll put it into a map, and it'll put that into the rec private field, because the rec offers a private field for just all the extra stuff that plugins do. Somebody made a telemetry plugin for it. There was the curl rec plugin that I use. That's not really they have a plugin, but curl rec is just to turn curl responses to and from rec structs. So I use that as well in Mercury. So it's really all these different parts of the ecosystem that was really nice, because it means I didn't have to write it. I didn't write rec. I didn't have to architect the way plugins work. I just end up leveraging all those things, right? And putting that into an HTTP client, which then also does the code generation, which is really nice because, you can play around with your APIs or whatever. You could say, I want to do a GET request at this endpoint. I want to use these params. It lets you put in the parameters. It lets you use environment variables, stuff like that. And then you can test it. And then when you're done, you just generate the code, and then you can take out the code and put it into your project.
Nice. I'm going to have to start using Rec in my projects, I think.
Yeah, it's really good. Wojtek, he made a blog post recently that was called rethinking SDKs, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm glad he wrote about, because it's largely when you use Rec, you'll realize this. This is a natural conclusion to using something like Rec, because if you look at the instructor library again, the one that Thomas works on, he was using the OpenAI EX HTTP or the OpenAI client, right? You know how there's the OpenAI library that wraps their API. Eventually, he just ditched that as a dependency, because he realized he only needed a subset of the API calls, and he realized that with Rec it was just as simple. It is just as simple to do it in Rec as it is using a bespoke client for it for most things, right? For most things, they're simple REST API calls. But yeah, Rec is one of my favorite libraries right now. I use it almost every day, it seems like. And he's still updating it a ton. There's still, if you look on his issue board, there's a lot of stuff that's planned, a lot of stuff that's being worked on. Yeah. And it's just been really good. Yeah.
So what do you call your API client that you made in LiveBook?
I call it Mercury, MER.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And that would be
MERQUERY, something like that.
And then you can also use it in Smart Cells.
It is a smart cell. So you can't
use,
you can't use it. So essentially you just, within the setup cell of a LiveBook, you include it with the include dependency. And when you include it, it's then registered as a smart cell. So when you hover over to create a new cell at the bottom between any cells, you can click add a new Elixir cell. You can say add a new block, or you can click add a new smart cell. And when you include Mercury in your dependency, it then shows up under that smart cell menu.
Okay. I'm going to have to check that out. Because API clients, and I always used to use Pause, and then it turned into Rapid API, but they all try to push the payment plan now. Yeah,
it was just something to me that just seemed a little ridiculous. And And I mean, I get it. If you're a company, you need to make money.
Well, yeah,
It just
you
didn't
do.
ever seem like something that warranted having a whole company behind it to me.
I agree.
You know, and stuff out there exists that the way I prefer, if I were to monetize something, is like give as much possible for free as you can, and then have people opt into paying you for certain things. But that's also just from like the open source philosophy, I guess, to a certain extent. Like I get so much of what I do for free, then for me to turn around, like, I don't know, spend a few weeks bundling it together and then try to charge exorbitant amount of money would feel bad.
Yeah.
But then again, I've never been in a position where I had to ask that. So like there's some luxury to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think like a major strength, if you're a developer or you struggle with learning new concepts, you have to work on being able to read code and documentation. Because without that, you struggle. Like I remember when I first started programming, I needed videos and tutorials, and you can only learn as much as you can find then. You can't just dig through documentation and teach yourself. So it's a big improvement when you get to a point where you can read documentation and understand what to do.
Yeah, most of what I've learned, like people ask me for resources sometimes, and like especially on LiveBook, and most of what I've learned is like reading other implementations. Like the LiveBook team has put out, like when I was learning how to make a smart cell, the LiveBook team put out has a certain number of smart cells. Like the Bumblebee smart cell is an officially supported one from the LiveBook team. So I just read through that and did everything based off that. Like right now, Mercury uses Vue as its front end. And I'd never used Vue before. And the only reason I used Vue is because that's what they were using on Bumblebee. And I was like, I'm just going to rip as much of this code as I can and use that. And now it's largely different, but I'm still using Vue just because I did my first week on it. And at that point I was like, well, and I ended up actually talking to Jonathan, and he's like, actually, we're kind of moving over to React now. And I was like, so well, I'm gonna stick to Vue just because I do not feel like changing all of this over to React. But definitely, there was also a lot of the meta programming stuff I've learned was from reading like Elixir, the core libraries, and then an interesting read if anybody just likes reading library code to see how they do it is actually XUnit. XUnit is way more complex than I thought it was until I started trying to read it. Because what I was trying to do is to see how they were using module attributes to use the tags. So I don't know if you've seen how they use
their
tags.
DSLs are like you can learn a lot. Dig. I agree. The XUnit is a cool, most underrated library ever.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And it took me a while. I reread the same thing over and over and over again because I was like, how is this happening? I was like, I know when I use XUnit, X or Y behavior is like the behavior I get. But how is this happening? And it took me a while until reading it to actually figure out what was happening. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that meta programming stuff obviously happens at compile time. And a lot of the stuff that happens isn't reflected in the source code necessarily. But yeah, I would recommend read so many of the Elixir libraries also just practice really good, like idiomatic Elixir, because Elixir has a certain flavor to it. Yeah. And when I was first learning, there was a lot of things I did that like had bad code smell in the Elixir world. And so I'd put in, I think I like did a couple of PRs on Scholar, which is the Elixir's traditional machine learning library. And some of the first response I get like, oh, you should do it this way. It wasn't that what I did was wrong. It was like, instead of breaking something out into multiple function headers, I like did it in a case statement where it was like, when you enter into a function, the very first thing you do is a case statement. You can probably do multiple function heads, stuff like that.
Yeah, with some pattern matching. That's just one of those Elixir things you have to get used to, right? When you come from like an object-oriented background or almost any other language, it's hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the big reasons I haven't done more with Gleam is the fact that I now love multiple function heads way too much to give it up, because I think it's one of the patterns that makes code the most readable.
I agree, dude. I love Elixir is the only language that is fun for me to write.
Yeah, I enjoy it. There's not many that I enjoy. Honestly, I think I tweeted this not that long ago. Ruby, because of the the close ties in terms of like the inspiration from Ruby that had into Elixir, like Ruby strikes me as something that would probably also be very fun to write, but I haven't written much of it. But that
Yeah.
also seems like a language that would just be a lot of fun to write. Like for me, certain languages, depending on your mood, can be fun, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of Zig. Honestly, Zig strikes me as a language. I haven't worked with it much, but like it offers a lot of what you might want to do in like C, but with like slightly less kind of thorny using it,
Hmm.
you know. Or something like Go, I guess, maybe is a better example of like, oh, if you want to kind of scratch the itch that maybe C gives people, but you don't want to go like so far down as to writing C and like redo all your data structures or have to use all your data structures from scratch, stuff like that. Maybe
Hmm.
something like Go. So I've been trying to
Yeah.
lean into those languages more, but I keep coming back to Elixir. Every time I try out another language, I'm like, yeah, but I'll just go back and write it in Elixir.
What's funny is like before I came over to Elixir, you know, it was JavaScript, Node.js, all that junk. I avoided Ruby because I didn't like the Ruby on Rails. Like I
Mhm.
didn't like how everything was like so tightly coupled, and I was
Okay.
like, why
Like
would you
super
want to do that?
opinionated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why would you want that? And my opinion on that has completely changed because like just talking to Jose when I had him on for the 12th birthday,
Mhm.
if you're doing any major rewrites, you're probably rewriting all your code anyways. So it doesn't really matter if like your front end is integrated with your server because like Phoenix Live View and Elixir having like the server side rendering gives you a lot of superpowers and performance enhancements for your projects. That's like
Yeah.
it's worth it. It's worth it, you know.
Yeah, and also I wouldn't trust myself writing half the code that they just bundle in for you, you know. I'm like,
That's
thank
true.
goodness they did that because I would have shot myself in the foot doing that thing, but because they included it, it's now like I look like I know what I'm doing. So,
I think one of the nicest features of Phoenix is the authentication. You can
yeah,
just, you know, generate it and you don't, because that's it's a complicated process to build from scratch.
and it's definitely like a very high stakes process and something you
Hmm.
want to get right. Like I was dabbling around a little bit with Supabase and I was using their auth and I like it pretty well, but I had a lot of people kind of ask me, or at least a couple, be like, hey, why would I use Supabase auth over using like mix, you know, Phoenix.gen auth? And I was like, you probably wouldn't. Like you probably, if you know how to do your own auth, you should probably roll your own auth if you can do
Hmm.
it and it doesn't take up a ton of time, you know. But if you're already doing this and um, you don't want to have to worry about auth, sometimes it's nice having something that you trust and something that plugs in well with what you're doing. I had pretty good experience with that. But the project I was working on with that was like I said, it was a Phoenix related project, and I eventually just got bored of doing the front end stuff, and I was like, I just dropped off of it, and I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to go back to like tinkering on LiveBook.
Yeah. Well, I'm officially going to start tinkering on LiveBook. I think it would be fun. It would probably
Yeah,
help me solve a lot of problems too before I take it to my code bases.
yeah. I end up doing most of my work in LiveBook now, and I know people who attach, they attach sessions from the LiveBook into their applications once they start getting really big. But like I said, the thing I'm working on right now with the Flint, the embedded schema stuff, I like do all my testing for that on LiveBook, and that project actually stemmed from my Mercury project because when I was doing Mercury, the relationship with it's no database, right? And it's all client server. So I have to write the client side on the view, and then I'm writing the server side on Elixir as the smart cell stuff. And I wanted a good, easy way to like serialize all my stuff, JSON enforced types and enforced validations. And I didn't really like any of the solutions. And I was like, I'm already familiar with Ecto. I wish that like it was really easy to do this in Ecto, and like Ecto offers a way to do it. But then that's why I ended up writing Flint, because it basically just puts everything together that Ecto already kind of offers and just packages it in a way that's meant for that specific use case.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that. And like Ecto is such an amazing library.
yeah, and it's like an API design that so many people. It's pretty ubiquitous with Elixir. Like if you work in
Hmm.
Elixir, you probably have a decent understanding of chain sets of the schemas, of their types that they support, of extending types. Because another thing about the way I have Flint is it basically punts the whole idea of types to just use Ecto, or if you want to extend the types, extend making a new Ecto type. Like
Okay.
I made an Ecto type for it that's like a union type, because if it's not backed by a database, it doesn't really matter that it has to actually resolve to like that it has to be able to determine anything it resolves to an actual type. Because obviously
Right,
you
that
could
makes
use
sense.
any. Yeah, you could use any, but because I know this is only really going to be used in a DB less environment, I just made a union type and used the ecto.parameterized type behavior, and now I can use that with this. And then you could theoretically use it on other projects as well, which is what I liked about that idea of keeping everything kind of within ecto.
Hmm. How difficult is it with LiveBook to like connect into another process, or like if I have an Elixir API somewhere, is it
Mm-hmm.
easy to connect a LiveBook instance to an existing project?
So you can do it the same way you would with any Elixir project in terms of if you can like actually attach a node or if you can communicate between nodes, as long as they're like on the same, as long as the nodes can talk, you can use LiveBook
Okay.
to talk to it. But they also recently, in like the most recent LiveBook update, they added HTTP proxying, I think. So essentially you can proxy, because before any request, you couldn't like send an outward, like a request from the outside into your LiveBook and handle it within LiveBook. But now they added a way to proxy stuff through a function. So you basically say, here's the proxy setup, route it through this plug essentially, and then handle it within the LiveBook. So now even if it's like outside your node, if you just want to set it up as an API, you can do that as
Oh,
well.
nice. Okay.
Mhm.
That's really
But
cool.
yeah, that's new as like a week or two ago, something like
Okay.
that.
Sweet.
I haven't played around with that yet, but there's been a couple of like Hugo did a couple examples showing it.
Okay. Really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get Hugo on this podcast as well. I need to reach out to him because he
Yeah,
would
he'd
be.
probably be good. And I bet you like I kind of look at I work with LiveBook from a different perspective than he does, obviously, because he has like more bird's eye view. He sees, I think he has a better perspective on everything that's actually used for out in the wild. I can kind of speak to what I use it for or what I could envision it being used for. But I think he probably has a better idea of like, oh, here's what people are actually using it for. We get people from these X or Y companies tell us that they're using it for this. So he'd probably be a good one to talk to as well for that.
Yeah, I need to just start using it for internal tooling and stuff at HGA.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Yeah,
I
I
feel like
think
it
I
would.
think once you get it, you'll be like, wow, this is a huge time saver. I mean, you'll have that like initial stall from having to learn it, but once you learn it, like at this point, if I have a new idea and I want to create a demo for it, it's super fast with Kino and with
Mhm.
LiveBook and everything.
Where do I start with learning it? Is the documentation the best spot right now?
So the documentation is like perfectly fine, but in my opinion, I would probably look at something like honestly, just look at some of the smart cells for how they use it. If you're looking at Kino in particular, right? Because looking at how the smart cells work, in my opinion, gives a decent idea of like the architecture of how LiveBook works. Because
Hmm.
if you just want to use LiveBook, the documentation's fine, right? The documentation, I haven't looked at it in a while. Like they bundle in certain documentation, and with that embedded runtime, you can actually add your own documentation that gets bundled in with LiveBook. But they show you some of the basic stuff you can do with it. They show you how you can do multi-node live books. They show you how you can like do the in order. They show you smart cells. They show you some basic Kino stuff. And honestly, I don't have a great answer other than just like poke around at it, because so much of it is like kind of like childlike discovery of like hitting the buttons on the page and being like, oh, let me try doing this smart cell.
Well, it goes back to what I actually just said. You have to just start with a project
Mm-hmm.
and learn it through that project, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you were like if you had something where you're like, I want to rewrite one of my courses in LiveBook. Let me just start with that. And then as you're doing it, you're going to figure out the different things it offers, right? And you'll
Yeah.
probably even offer ways that it enhances like actually Ash, if you know the Ash framework, they do their
I actually
yeah,
just started playing around with Ash because I had Zach on,
yeah.
and what intrigued me was the built-in admin dashboard
Mm-hmm.
because that's always a
That admin
pain.
dashboard is really cool.
It is. It's really nice. And like I like just like being completely new to Ash, not understanding what I was doing. I built the Elixir Mentor blog in maybe like 4 hours total of work, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty good.
Yeah, that is pretty good. And I remember I saw when you posted that and you mentioned that you just learned Ash. And I think that was pretty, like, honestly, it's a pretty big like pretty quick pickup on it, because I definitely did not pick up on Ash that quickly. But I also, like I said, didn't have a great use case for it.
Yeah.
And to me, my experience with Ash was like, you really need something that lends itself to modeling it with Ash. And if you're like trying to fit Ash onto something that doesn't fit that modeling, the way like that kind of a way of thinking, it didn't work for me in terms of how I was thinking about it. But that's also because it was like I was just getting past understanding live view, and then I was trying to add this on top.
I will say understanding Ash's like DSLs is so hard. My brain is not, it doesn't work that way. But once I figure out how they work, everything just runs so smoothly.
It's the type of thing that really, it's like, I wish I had a use case for it, because it looks like it'd be really, like really fun to use.
Well,
but the thing that interests me more about the Ash project is all of their supporting libraries, like Spark, the DSL library. That seems really cool. And then their new one, Igniter, which is used for like, from what I can tell, it's used for like initting projects and then patching inits to projects, stuff like that. Lets you do code generation, like template generation, with the ability to like patch things.
Yeah, it seems really cool. He touched on it, and it's one of those things that I also need to go and check out. And I know they have like a component library too, like Pyro, like they're doing a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, like their whole ecosystem surrounding it almost excites me more than Ash itself, because I just don't have a need for Ash. But I could pick at some of those other pieces and use them, right? Like the Spark, especially, something like that.
When I learned about the admin dash, I was procrastinating building a blog because I just was lazy. I didn't want to do it. Like I was like, Elixir Mentor is just a landing page. Like I don't want to put in all the work. And then when I realized I could just have the admin dash that already supports Markdown, I was like, all right, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so much, you get so much value for that. And to have something where you're able to go from zero to, like you said, to a blog within just a few hours, and like adding new kind of layers of abstraction that you're like, to do that while also learning the layers of abstraction is very impressive to do it within that time. And I'm sure that that's something where it's like, because of how well they've architected it, that they've done that. But those sorts of like developer tools really interest me more so than a lot of application type stuff, even though like Mercury is the thing that I've done that's probably the most like user application related. But even still, it's a developer tool.
Well, so anything that speeds up development is so beneficial. Like anything that helps, if you're a dev shop, anything that helps you spit out projects faster, it's better for the client, it's better for you, it's better for everyone.
Also, I just don't have a design bone in my body, so it's really easy if I'm just doing dev centric tooling to not have to worry about it. So that's like what I hide behind a lot. And that's a big thing I say about like programming in general, is I feel like it lets you be creative without like being artistic, if you know what I mean. Like you don't have to be very artistic, but you can still be very creative within programming. And for me, that's what I like.
See, that is me too. I'm definitely more creative with solutions than like UI and UX. Like, don't ask me to design an app. It's not going to look good unless I'm basing it off of a component library.
It's like, it'll look extremely derivative, but it'll work.
Yes.
And it won't like hurt your eyes.
All right. So Chris asked when you're going to be creating more LiveBook builds, because he loves your YouTube content and it's sparse out there.
Like doing YouTube videos? I guess I did that one a while ago. I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about the YouTube videos. For me, like even when it comes to writing blog posts, it always kind of is like a yin and yang between, for me, that portion isn't like what I enjoy. I don't really enjoy the creating a video or writing a blog post. Half the time when I do a blog post, it's just so I have something to reference, or so I can point people to something to reference. So for me, it always feels like I'm pulling away from doing the thing that's like productive in a way, even though I know a YouTube video is productive in a different way, and a blog is productive in a different way. I don't know, stand by for more on that. I haven't really thought too much about it. I've considered making more, but each time I think about it, I think about having to edit a video and then I decide not to. So
dude, content creation takes a lot of time. It definitely takes away from playing and building fun projects.
Yeah, if I could just, have somebody come in and take this. Honestly, I don't even care if somebody else wants to take the stuff I do and make videos around it. Like, it's all MIT licensed anyway. So that being said, if you don't not doing
maybe I make a basics LiveBook playlist on YouTube, and you can help me create the outline.
Yeah, I'd be more than willing to do that. But especially with the baby right now and work and everything. I will be at Elixir Conf, so if anybody wants to talk
nice. I'm trying to pull the trigger. I think it would be fun to get down there.
I wasn't originally going to do it, and then I started realizing I kind of actually had like a talk, like the outlines of a talk kind of, because I gave a talk last year, and this year I just wasn't planning on doing it. And I don't have a company sending me, so I didn't want to pay for I didn't want to spend the money to go just for it to be almost like a vacation in a way, because I'm not going on behalf of a company. And it really just kind of be a vacation in many ways. But I eventually was like,
in Orlando in the dead heat of summer.
Yeah. But eventually I was like, I think I actually have some stuff to talk about here in LiveBook. And so I put out a tweet or something, and was kind of like, oh, I wish I would have signed up for this. And the folks at ElixirConf were generous enough they reached out to me. It was like, hey, if you want to present, let us know. We can get you on the
nice. That's
docket.
Awesome.
So I ended up kind of giving my pitch. And yeah, now I'm going to be presenting about LiveBook there. So I'll go into more detail. Probably, I still haven't determined how much I want it to be like tutorial-esque versus this sort of thing where it's giving you an idea of the stuff you can do. Probably lean on this side of like, here's the different things you can do, and like really kind of just touch on how to do it, right? Touch on, here's the difference between all the different terminologies that they use.
I feel like conference chats, they're hard to balance, right? Like how much code along tutorial style stuff do you do versus just showing off the leverage and power that you have with a tool.
Yeah. The talk I gave last year, I tried to balance between, and last year was on decision trees, because that was my library. It's like decision trees, and it kind of showed off how these couple libraries work in a certain sense, but then it also showed off a code demo. And it kind of was trying to apply the code demo to like spam prediction. And had some people come up to me and be like, we're very happy. Like they thought the talk was really good, but I could also tell from looking at the audience that some people were somewhat lost. Like I didn't do a good job. Maybe it was like, I didn't do a good job at setting expectations for what the talk was going to be. So I'll have to think about how I want to pace that for this upcoming.
Well, talk. Nice. I'm excited to find out what it is. I'm sure it'll be awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I know at the very least it's going to be about LiveBook, and it's going to be touching on some of I know Hugo's given a talk on like internal applications. So I think that this is going to be more about extending LiveBook's usability. So instead of like just writing internal applications, and maybe I'll talk to him and even try to get a better sense of what he'll be covering so we don't overlap too much.
Yeah.
But my idea is kind of like how to extend on it, like the stuff with writing custom smart cells, extending with Kino, writing custom interactions on something that's outside of LiveBook. Like the Mercury, I have to fix it because I haven't updated in a while, but originally it had a mixed task that would generate LiveBooks for you based off of your Phoenix routes. So it would look at your Phoenix routes and it would generate a LiveBook for you with the Mercury Smart Cell with all your routes predefined. So you could go through and test it easily. I have to fix that, but that's something where it's like, because of the way our LiveBook was made, you can easily kind of do those sorts of things. And I was actually looking into Igniter for that. I was trying to see if there'd be a good way to create a library that lets you dynamically create LiveBooks, because the way I'm doing it is just like writing almost like the markdown and relying on the fact that I know how LiveBook is going to render it, rather than doing something that's like a first class dynamic generation of LiveBook cells. That might be a fun library. So
yeah, that would be really cool. I would like that. It would be cool to do that. Like you automatically get all the routes, right? And then also you could do something like XDocs where you pull in documentation too. And then it all could be in a LiveBook for like
somebody brought up making a Swagger, like
that.
That's
cool.
like that's something that's kind of on the roadmap, but I just know that's going to be a big lift. So I've put it off. But that's definitely, I'm thinking of doing that. I'll probably at first get importing from, what do they call, Open API? I think is Swagger used to be now it's called Open API. But that sort of format. So the first thing I'll probably do is support importing from that. and maybe I'll get into like generating that, which would be really cool. Because if you have an application giving somebody like a LiveBook that has like live routes on it that you can hit, especially since, or even as a developer, right? Because you can attach to that node, you can launch it. It has all the routes set up with the documentation, and they're actually live because you can attach it to your running node. So something like that.
Yeah, that would be really cool because I mean, like as an API developer, you're always in, an API client testing your endpoints, and it would just be built in. You see your documentation, you can see the response with just clicking probably just a run button, right? Or a submit.
It's just evaluate. It's it's the same button as to run any cell, but it just runs the smart cell.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would be so cool. I like that.
Yeah, and then you can save all of it. Like I added on there the ability to save all your queries into a file and then load them.
So. Nice. Okay, I need to learn LiveBook. Dang it.
You should go check it out and let me know what you think. And then let me know if you read through the source code. It should be. I tried to like actually go back through and clean it up because it was kind of messy. That was part of why I wanted to do the schemas and make it a little more formalized, so that if anybody wanted to go and try to learn from it, it'd be easier than when I had no like predefined schemas. So like I was using all these raw string values because I knew what I was expecting, but nowhere in the code would you know like what are the possible values for this, yada yada.
Yeah. So much to do.
There's a lot. Yeah, it's a luxury to just go through and do this stuff.
It's fun. It's really cool. I love seeing all these projects and cool tools popping up in Elixir space. So,
and I see them. Yeah, I mean, I think that the forecast is looking good for Elixir, which is why these sorts of things are, like I said, as of right now, if you create certain libraries that then do something even small, like seemingly small, think about the fact that what's the notorious example in JavaScript? It's the like is even library. If you look at like the monthly downloads of is even, it's like if once a language gets popular, it's like any library can become huge. Exactly. And so it's like it's really important to contribute when a language is early on. And it's not like Elixir is super early, but it's kind of I'd say it's like on the cusp of mainstream right now. At least mainstream, not mainstream, but on the cusp of like fairly known within the developer community. Whereas I feel like 2 years ago when I started, I had not heard of it until my friend told me about it. And, I had heard of Haskell. I had heard of, what are some of the others? Elm. Some of the other ones? Like OCaml. I'd heard of OCaml before I heard of Elixir. So I feel like in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of positive publicity for the language and a lot of good strides when people start picking it up. And that was the thing my friend told me when I started is I was like, why should I use this language? Or like, why do you use it? And he was like, just use it. Just pick it up. Just try it out and you'll be sold. And I think,
I heard about Elixir for 2 years before I even checked it out. And then when I checked it out, it was game over.
Yeah. I think I tweeted it out, but the convincing argument for me was actually when I looked at the Axon library, and that's the neural network library, right? And because I do a lot of machine learning stuff and I was used to stuff like Keras and TensorFlow, and the way a lot of those, when you do like a sequential, I don't know, have you ever, how like in Python, if you do like sequential function applications, unless you use like, I think there's some ways to write them where it's almost like JavaScript method applying chaining or like Rust method applying chaining. But the way like in standard Python, you kind of do it is like you expand outwards this way. So it's like you do a map and then a collect and then a list, and you kind of work outwards this way with the parentheses going out. And that's just super ugly for me. I hate looking. And
so it was the piping for you.
Yeah, and it was as soon as I looked at the neural network and saw like input layer, pipe, convolutional 2D, pipe, dense, pipe convolution, or whatever it was, right? Just this straightforward sequence that like maps directly to what you'd see. In like an
whenever
paper.
You're nesting, like your brain doesn't work that way when you're nesting in functions with parentheses and however you write code. It's hard. Like that's why I feel like if you learned a functional language, and actually if you learned Elixir as your first language, I think your brain wants to solve things that way. Yeah,
and I listened to this book recently called The Unicorn Project, because I do some like a lot of the work I do is like in DevSecOps, stuff like that.
Okay.
CI/CD, developer operations, stuff like that. And the Unicorn Project, it's a follow up to a book that was I forget what the original book was called, but there was a book that was like that there was kind of the follow-up to, but it was kind of about how a team at this company called Parts Unlimited went about like demangling, like imagine like your headphones, like the old, like these sorts of iPhone, when this would go into your pocket and it would get all mangled, and like that process of untangling it all. They were essentially doing that for all of their DevOps. And one of the
it's not the DevOps handbook, is it?
It's not the DevOps handbook. It's by the same author though. If you look it up, it's called the Unicorn Project.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. One of
DevOps
the biggest
project. That's a good, or handbook is a good book too.
Yeah, I actually have it right here. Hold on. It's this book right here. This is DevOps handbook. I have it right here. But the Unicorn Project is by the same author, I believe. And this one I just had in an audiobook because one of my bosses, he when we got onto the team, he gave us all like a credit to buy this book because he's like, I really want you guys to listen to this. So I listened to it, and
I'm gonna have to get it.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. And a lot of what they talk about, one of the protagonists, I forget her name, but it's based off a true story. One of the biggest things that she talks about is how mutability was the cause of all of the, not all, but most of the stuff they were going through was caused by mutability. And so she talks over and over and over again about this book, about how changing to immutability really helped take away problems. It's like I think Jose and other people of the core team talk about that concept a lot, about how it's not always about solving a problem. It's about taking away the source of the problem. And mutability versus immutability in this instance in the book had a lot to do with that.
I mean, worrying about state of a variable being, manipulated from other places as you're doing manipulation yourself, it causes a lot of bugs. You get your race conditions and a lot of issues.
And even just like going back to the readability component of it, if you're reading something and you're pretty rest assured that everything you're going to need to know about this function is within the confines of this function definition and the block, it's a lot easier to read that and to be able to do like distributed contributions onto a team rather than having weird side effects that happen. And like I went through the process of porting over a library from Python to Elixir, and I wrote a blog post about it. The library is called Hummingbird, the Python one. The way they had to architect it was a bit different because they're coming at it from this angle of like there's this established machine learning community and they were kind of retrofitting their solution to work with these other ones. Whereas the way I did mine is I declared a behavior or a protocol. And because I was the only one who wrote the library that did decision trees at this point, I could just implement that protocol. So I had like the luxury of being able to come at it from that different angle. But a big thing I noticed is I was trying to read through their stuff is how like I would get through doing something and then realize that there was some side effect in there that I didn't realize that was causing issues. And also the inheritance tree of things gets really hard to trace if you're reading source code, because if you're reading like this is a subclass of this is a subclass of this with traits from this or whatever it's called, like mix-ins in certain languages, right? But all those things are on different files. It's really hard to like get a coherent picture of what's going on, as opposed to a function where you're like, here are the inputs, here's what it's doing, here are the outputs.
For sure. And I think like the immutability and like the functional paradigm, you write cleaner code on accident too. Like it makes you a better programmer. You're not making these nasty functions that do everything. You kind of think things through. You're like, okay, now I need to transform it to do this, transform.
Yeah, that whole idea of like thinking in transformations is a big part of it too. And at first, when my friend showed me the Axon library, my first instinct was almost like, whoa, doing neural networks in a functional language, that sounds complicated, because I've been so ingrained in doing things object oriented. But the more I thought about it, I was like, no, that actually makes perfect sense, because they're just like all a neural network is it's like nonlinear not stepwise, but nonlinear transformations like that are basically sequenced together. So those sorts of things actually lend themselves very heavy to different math domains too, because of thinking of things in transformations.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I think it's the winner. I almost don't want to waste my time in other languages.
But then, every time we need speed, I look to what Isaac Yonemoto is doing with Zig and Ziegler and seeing all those things. I'm like I had this one that I did for my talk that's called Mighty, and it was going to be like natural language processing generalized, but I really only wrote the TF-IDF vectorizer, which for those who don't know, that's term frequency, inverse document frequency. And it's essentially a way to take words or really any token on a page and to assign some sort of weight value to it to say what level of importance it has. It's a way to like account for, in the English language, like articles, like and filler words, stuff like that shouldn't have as high of a weight. But it's a way to vectorize and to encode things. And I spent a ton of time optimizing this because
you did a thing where you would evaluate like URL context, like blog posts, right? Is that what you
that used this library, right? So that under the hood, this library uses Flow right now. And it's pure Elixir, other than the fact that it uses NX, which obviously binds outside of Elixir into like C. But the parts I wrote was only Elixir. And Paulo from he works at Dockyard, and he's on the NX core team, and he's the one who maintains gRPC. So very, very smart guy, was helping me. We were like pair programming, trying to get this as fast as possible. And it's like decently fast, but I'm like, I could just take a day and probably rewrite this in Zig or rewrite this in C, and it would probably be so much faster, even though, so there's some things like that for that particular instance that maybe functional doesn't make the most sense, because when you're doing these very large scans of things where like in place modifications actually save you a ton of time over the course of a large sample, it might make a big difference. But in terms like conceptually functional, it's easier. But in terms of speed, sometimes you kind of have to deviate.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. And I mean, that's why you'll see a lot of companies use, multiple, like Discord, I believe, uses Elixir and Rust. They have their heavy lifting in Rust, and then their processes and concurrency with the Elixir side of things. Yeah.
I actually have a great deal of admiration for anybody who has the patience to read and write Rust. A lot of my friends do it, and they'll talk about it, and I'm like, I'll sit there with the VS Code, the Rust IntelliSense, and just fight with it for like 5 minutes at a time. And I'm like, I'm tapping out.
I haven't played around with Rust, but my business partner, Ben, he loves Rust. So I don't know.
It's a cool language. It just it doesn't work in a way that my brain doesn't work in a way that lends itself to Rust.
Yeah.
But I also haven't tried it that hard. I did like an advent of code in it for like half of the advent of code. But those are like, I don't think it was a good showcase for Rust. It probably wasn't a fair go at Rust, because I was doing like advent of code style things, and Rust really lends itself to different things. I used to do a lot more systems programming with like C. Maybe if I tried doing those sorts of things again with Rust, I'd have a lot more appreciation for it, because the borrow checker would really come in handy if you're doing things, manipulating anything to do with system resources. But when you're like used to a VM like the Beam, it's like night and day difference having to go from working with the Beam to working with something like Rust. So
yeah, for sure. All right. These go fast, dude. We just talked for an hour and a half.
That didn't feel like it.
No, I love it. I guess if anyone has questions, now would be a good time. And thank you so much for joining me here today, Andres.
Thank you for
awesome.
having me.
And I'm going to talk you into coming back on and do like a little pair programming LiveBook session with me. I think it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. We can get a time to do that, and let me know what you want to work on. And then
you
have something in mind.
I'll try to think of a project, and then everyone can see how slow of learner I am live on a stream.
You'll see how I have like basically a dedicated desktop on my Mac dedicated to just hex docs at this point. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I think there's always at least one or two tabs open in the hex docs for me. And lately they've been Ash framework stuff. So
yeah, I keep the Kino. I actually have a quick key set up on my keyboard I use Arc browser. And so I just like do like Command TH, and then it launches hex.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. All right. It looks like we have a question. Sidebar later. I'm curious if the MLIR adoption is some of the Elixir ML libraries would contribute to speed ups across Elixir in the future, like Mojo did for Python.
I don't know about how it would compare to something like Mojo to Python, because honestly, I haven't really been that in touch with Mojo, and until it's open source, I'm kind of just going to sit I think they did release some stuff open source fairly recently on it. But I'll kind of let the dust settle on that before I make any judgments on it. In terms of the MLIR, that would be a better question for Paolo. He's the one who's worked on it. My impression is if you're working on a Mac, because it couldn't have leveraged the GPU, if you're on a Apple Silicon Mac, I think that's what it applies to. Then you'll have definitely experience better performance than having to rely on like non-metal, non-MLIR stuff. I think in general, it's also just meant to kind of give a common ground, and I think XLA is moving towards that implementation as well. So it's also a lot of future proofing, but I would definitely think there'd probably be at least some performance benefits.
All right. Well, cool, man. I appreciate it. I have all of Andres's links in the description below. Definitely follow him on Twitter. I'll have to add your YouTube channel because I didn't realize you had one. So,
yeah, I don't post on it very often. Yeah, you could. Yeah, feel free to add it. I don't post on that often, but when I do, if you want to follow, you'll be sure to see it.
Well, I mean, you create awesome content, and I actually want to check out the video editor that you use.
Oh, the FFmpeg one? Yeah.
No. For the one that you edit your videos with, where like it automatically zooms in and stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's called Screen Studio. I'll send it to you. I actually have an affiliate link for it.
Oh, okay, nice.
It's a one-time purchase. Very, very good. I think it's Mac only right now, though. So
okay, because right now I use ScreenFlow because it's simple and I know how to use it. But for zooming in on stuff, it's so like, is it pretty really automatic? Is it?
It's pretty automatic. You can go in. It'll basically anytime you click, anytime there's certain actions that you do, it'll automatically zoom for. But you can go after the fact and change it. And you can change pointer size, stuff like that. And the creator of it's constantly adding more. He's on Twitter.
Okay,
but I think it's just one dude as far as I know. But pretty big names have come out and been very supportive of that software. And I think I downloaded it like 6 months ago or something like that. And I've been very happy with it. The main thing is like export times kind of took a long time, but supposedly he just released an update that helps export times.
Oh, nice.
But it's a really, really good. I only use it for kind of small videos. So it doesn't really, I don't notice anything really about export times. So.
Okay. Yeah. When I do, like, I try to keep most of my videos like long form between 20 and 30 minutes, and like ScreenFlow, like, especially if I'm doing 4K videos, it takes sometimes almost an hour.
Okay. Yeah. I don't really know what this performance would be like, but I think they have a free trial where you can do everything except export it. So you wouldn't get a real sense of that.
It'd be really cool. Something like that for OBS. I actually just got a comment. Someone was complaining that I don't zoom in enough on code when they're watching on mobile. And like when you're live, like being distracted with zooming in and buttons, it's hard to keep focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, that would be, I don't know. I don't think it has any sort of like live stream support. Maybe,
I'm sure it doesn't. It would just be really cool if it did.
Yeah. I also thought about a pie in the sky type thing. I always thought about was for like live view dev screeners. So you know how there's like GitHub secret scanning or tools like TruffleHog?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, there should be something like that where like it'll obviously add some latency, but does like visual image recognition, tries to identify if you have any sensitive information on screen and filters it, blurs it before it actually gets streamed out.
That would be really nice.
You'd probably need a ton of compute, but
that is a fear of mine for doing live, where if you accidentally show like an API key or something, because obviously the whole time you're live, it could be abused.
Yeah. Whenever
I do recorded stuff, I am too lazy to blur it out. So I'll always just delete the key before I release the video,
Yeah, I don't blame you for that. One time, I think in that one video that I did on YouTube, I ended up having to blur something out. And I think I was using DaVinci Resolve to edit it. And just like doing that blur, like keyframe by keyframe, I was like, this is not worth it. I should have just
it takes so long. And like, I'm all thumbs. Like I can edit, but I'm not like keyboard shortcut editor.
No, me neither. I don't have like my specialty keyboard for it.
Yeah. But all right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andres, and everyone else that joined. I hope you all have a good weekend. And this will be up on podcast platforms tomorrow morning at some point. So awesome. Thanks. All right. Thanks a lot. See you guys. Testing.